Wolves of Croton. The Untold Story of Milo. John Abdo. Chapter 18. Over My Dead Body, the Untold Narrative of Arrhichion. As we were listening to the Crotonians, the sounds of trumpets interrupted. Everybody fell silent and turned their attention toward the entryway. With chins parallel to the ground, shoulders pulled back, and chests uplifted, the Phigalian committee entered the hall. Draped in the gallantry from that memorable day, Over My Dead Body crowned their reputation, an epigenetic inheritance from a former teammate, the immortalized three-time Olympiad Pankration champion, Arrhichion. Whereas the Phigalians were the most dignified affiliation at this event, the ceremony embodied historical significance for the Crotonians, as well. At the 54th Games, where Glycon had coached Hippostratus to his first Olympiad state victory, just minutes later, on the other side of the arena, Arrhichion lost his life successfully defending his third Olympiad Pankration Crown. As the crowds were still cheering for Hippostratus' victory, they immediately became paralytic and began shedding tears of sorrow, as Elian officials frantically ran around the arena shouting, "Arrhichion is dead! Arrhichion is dead!" So it was, then, that the Phigalians proudly represented the spirit of their late teammate, Arrhichion, as the gathering focused on their entry, and the 100 tables they had to choose from. The delegation approached Hippostratus, Glycon, Diotimos, and myself. Before taking seat at our table, Arrhichion's head coach began. He allowed himself to enter the realm of the gods. He would not submit to any man. Arrhichion conditioned himself to be an immortal, inseparably committed to Arrhate, the epitome of a human dedicated to the supreme order of Aegon. As the head coach was presenting his dissertation, one of Arrhichion's teammates, a rising Pankrationist himself, sprinted into the hall and began weaving and dodging his symmetrical body around wooden posts, tables, and chairs. Making contact with nothing and no one, the athlete continued to pattern his fighting skills for all to behold. After prancing around the servants and honored guests, the Phigalian fighter leaped onto a table, then proceeded to bound his body, parkering table after table across the hall. As he flew through the air, the Pankrationist threw punches, flung elbows, and darted kicks, imprinting the tabletops with his shadows, which were created from the beaming lights of the hanging torches. Now with a hand on Diotimos' shoulder, Arrhichion's head coach continued, "Observe very closely how he plants the bottoms of his feet onto the tabletops. He is like a cat in prowl of prey, soft, silent, yet mighty. He can bound like a flea and maneuver around objects like a dragonfly in flight. Judge whether he is flat-footed, and if so, calculate how much force is generated from the front or rear or sides of his feet." During stand-up fighting, feet are the only body parts that access the magnetic powers from the earth. A skilled fighter utilizes the grounds for stability, balance, and power. A clumsy fighter would merely feed the roaches, as the food and drinks on these tables would be knocked onto the floor. If his foot placements are off angle, a corresponding percentage will be deducted from his technical efficiency, disrupting his timing, power, and accuracy, and leaving him vulnerable for an opportunistic counterattack. After the Phigalian Pankrationist hopped off the table, along with Arrhichion's head coach, the two took seats at Diotimos' sides. Simultaneously, with eagerness in their eyes, which scanned up and down Diotimos' physique, they asked, "May we?" As Diotimos nodded in acknowledgement of their request, the entire hall left their tables and surrounded ours. Those who could not see stood on chairs or tables, others climbed onto the rafters or hung from the joists. The Phigalians grabbed hold of Diotimos' hands and examined the tooth marks on his knuckles. They accurately ascertained the force generated by Diotimos' punches by the depth and thickness of the scars. By comparing the gashes caused from Philotas' teeth with those from his subsequent opponents, the coaches were also able to map the progression of power generated from Diotimos' blows. The coaches then continued to examine Diotimos' fingers, along with his clenched fists, wrists, and forearms. They squeezed his biceps and deltoids, then ran their hands across his wide back. They determined the amount of pain Diotimos endured by examining the hundreds of scarifications the teen wore from his innumerable whippings. With short, jabbing punches, intended to inspect his core stability, the Phigalians began thumping Diotimos' abdomen, lumbar erectors, and external obliques. After requesting he mount the table, the Phigalians proceeded to examine Diotimos' gluteals and hips, quadriceps and hamstrings, and calves. Saving his feet for last, they began pulling at Diotimos' toes while rotating his feet to ascertain foot and toe dexterity, and quantify the integrity of his ankle joints and Achilles tendons. As they were concluding their evaluation of Diotimos' unique physical characteristics, I turned to the esteemed Phigalian coach and respectfully requested, as we break bread and bond our brotherhood, please share with us the life of Arrhichion. At that instant, the entire hall pressed even closer toward our table, focused on what Arrhichion's coach was about to say. The following is a brief narrative of Arrhichion of Phigalia. Pain was his pleasure. The Phigalian head coach proudly began. Arrhichion was living like a troglodyte when we discovered him. The central location for his dominion was situated in a cavern position on a gaping precipice off Mount Croton, 3,000 feet above a knotty oak forest to one side, and overlooking a torrent flowing with snow melt carved into a jagged ravine. He survived foraging the terrain and killing animals with weapons he crafted from rock, timber, and bone. He consumed all meat raw, and drank the blood and marrow of his kills. Although it was never determined from whom or where he originated, even Arrhichion himself had no knowledge. Rumors claim his mother gave birth to him just days before her village was ransacked. In an attempt to save her infant, the mother rushed into the mountains and hid her baby inside a fissure bored underneath the exposed roots of a mighty oak. Unbeknownst to the woman, the cleavage was a she-bear's den, slothed with 4 cubs, and when the sow returned, instead of attacking the intruder, the she-bear began to nurture the human baby as if her own. Other stories claim Arrhichion is an incarnation of the Minotaur, the beast man whom many claim to be immortal son of Zeus, representing a bull and a human embodied in one physique. Subsisting as a solitary mountain man, Arrhichion guarded his territory with ferocity. We first spotted him on a hunting expedition, and were caught totally by surprise. He jumped off a tree branch that stood above the ground 5 times his own height, and threatened to attack as we were breaching his territory. Realizing we had agitated a ferocious predator, we backed off and kept our distance, always avoiding eye contact. It required 1 full year, but over that period we regularly left the savage portions of our kills. Living a lone existence, Arrhichion understood pack predators, like wolves and otters, gained greater access to sustenance. So as we hunted beyond his territories, we would sense Arrhichion's presence, believing he wanted to join our group or scavenge our kills. Over time, Arrhichion understood we were intentionally leaving meat behind, and we slowly gained his trust. Eventually, he became part of our team. It was then, when he began to consume larger and more consistent quantities of meat, that Arrhichion's body grew bulkier and more powerful right before our eyes. At the completion of each kill, as was our custom, we drank the animal's blood, then practiced our skilled fighting techniques. Arrhichion watched us punch and grapple one another, and eventually we knew he wanted to muscle in on us. Quickly, we understood one-on-one contests against Arrhichion were suicidal, his powers too great for ours. To avoid injuring his hunting companions, Arrhichion challenged all of us at once. We would chase him through the forest and across varying inclines, trying to knock him off his feet or tackle him to the ground. Failing at those drills, he would handicap himself and just lay on his stomach, then motion for us to jump on his back and try to keep him grounded. But in spite of securing our best grips onto each of his limbs, we lacked the capacity to hold him down. Upping the challenge, hoping to increase our chances of success, Arrhichion would completely submerge himself in water after requesting, "Drown me. Try to drown me." But we quickly discovered just how violent this man could be, especially when he was being deprived of oxygen. Of all the handicaps and possible fighting scenarios we drilled with him, Arrhichion particularly enjoyed when we wrapped our arms around his neck and tried to choke him unconscious. But even with our tightest holds secured, squeezing our biceps into his throat with our strongest might, he would continue to breathe and kept pointing at his neck as if to say, "Harder. Squeeze my neck harder." As we traveled across the lands trading pelt, horn, and meat, Arrhichion was introduced to fighting challenges in many villages. Staged as celebratory rituals symbolic of a successful hunt, the contests motivated Arrhichion to participate himself. Although his style was crude, when faced with an opponent whom he sensed was trying to inflict harm, Arrhichion was the fiercest fighter we had ever witnessed, and during the mass of his earlier contests, many men who fought him lost their lives, or wished they did. During one contest, Arrhichion punched his opponent in the face and the man was killed on impact, instantly succumbing to a fractured skull. In another, Arrhichion charged in for a double leg takedown and the force from his thrust compounded the man's femurs through both hamstrings. The power he gained living with bears in the mountains conditioned his strength to become bestial. His fists flew as swift as a snow leopard's paws, while the power from his punches would fracture an ungulate's ribcage. His chokeholds were as strong as a bear's clinch, and his kicks as lethal as those of an African wild ass. And above all, his ability to withstand pain exceeded that of a bull. We realized, should he earn citizenship, Arrhichion would become an Olympiad champion one day. After enduring a detailed judiciary process, which required we groom his hair, trim the nails on his fingers and toes, and teach him how to present his physique in front of a sanctioned audience, the Phigalian magistrates granted Arrhichion citizenship, and I officially became his head coach. You just experienced a brief depiction of Arrhichion of Phigalia, three-time Olympiad Pankration champion. A man who understood death is more honorable than submission.
I'm John Abdo. I want to thank you for listening. Here's a link on how you can get a copy of my book, Wolves of Croton, The Untold Story of Milo.